Hello, hello. This is episode 60 something.
60 something C.
60 something C of the three body problem. We have
Am I the third guest of episode 60 something?
Yeah.
You were the third and most important guest.
Perfect.
Mr. Visi Stark from the Vertex Project is here with
I'll
us.
take it. I'll take it.
Visi, welcome to the show. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
coming
much.
back to LABScon after all these years. Thank you for your sponsorship at the conference and your support
course.
for all this research. Juanito is
What? What am I?
Now I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
What's the completion of that
I actually
sentence?
I could save him right now, but I'm just gonna let it.
Don't do it.
I don't know.
I'm a huge fan of the Vertex Project. Beyond any sponsorships, right? We've talked a lot about Synapse on the show.
On the show, yeah.
But also, S1
I should probably start listening then, huh?
Oh wow, yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's start right there for the folks in the audience, folks here and the folks in the audience who don't know what the Vertex Project and Synapse is. Can you give me a quick synopsis of what you guys do, where you
Sure.
fit, and who is your use case, who's your audience?
Yeah. So the Vertex Project is a company that that my co-founder and I founded in 2016 to build an intelligence analysis platform that actually met the needs of analysts. Right. We were seeing a lot of organizations produce these like indicator management systems and stuff like that. And that's not an analytical workbench. And it doesn't include enough diverse model elements for interdisciplinary analysis. So we built Synapse. And so Synapse is our platform that basically we sell commercially, that organizations use to do interdisciplinary analysis when they have like...
What does that mean? What does that
Yeah, so for example, financial analysis included with threat intelligence, included with potentially HR, like you guys, right? So one of the examples of organizations using it outside of just the pure traditional CTI use case is actually a Sentinel-1 use case, where you guys used it to do DPRK, remote worker analysis about resumes being submitted to job openings, right?
Damn
So
right.
that's an intelligence use case, but it's not a CTI use case in the traditional sense of the word. And so by building a more holistic kind of analysis platform, we've hoped to broaden the discipline and forward like the use cases. So that's kind of the very short version.
Juanito's a big fan. That's what I was going to say. I was going to use the word fanboy, and then I realized...
I am a huge fan, but also, I know I pissed off some people along the way, but like even before really getting fully on board with Synapse, like I've gone on the record saying like it's the only real threat intel platform, and I think precisely because in many ways it's not really a threat intel platform.
Yeah, we actually honestly try to avoid the like TIP moniker and the threat intel platform moniker. We prefer central intelligence system, but
Wow.
it's another made up term, but it's differentiated because it's not just threat intel.
Right.
So
Right. No, we're playing with that, right? Like the guys being able, Hagel, Alex Milankovsky, Chris St. Myers, like getting on top of the DPRK IT worker thing. Like it was one thing for St. Myers to spot like somebody applying to one of our jobs and being like, yo, this is weird. I think a lot of folks have had that experience. It was another thing to then be able to like programmatically put that together.
model that. Yep.
Yeah, like model all of it and then like plug in Greenhouse and have all of this like
Yep.
applicant, like HR is literally feeding us the data and they're excited about it.
Right.
And you go from, hey, here's one anomalous event to like, we're in a position to share intel with other people
Right.
on the basis of all the stuff that we're getting.
And being able to correlate things that would be outside of the scope for CTI, but are just traditional pivot use cases, right? Like claiming job experience with this exact syntax could be a line item on multiple DPRK submitter resumes.
Right.
And that would be something that would go overlooked by the traditional like HR review process, but is like bread and butter to CTI analysts due to like the pivoting use case.
I feel like we could get into this whole thing about just like the intelligence, the discipline that it really injects into the process. Like one of the things, we've been at it for a while is how do we want to model intelligence inside of Sentinel-1 and what does that tag tree look like? What does the layering look like? What is the inheritance of these different things? How do you want to like use these different power-ups and workflows? And essentially like how do you like it sounds like a ton of work, but there's this beautiful thing of addressing
the work
problem.
produces something that actually ends up being usable, right? It doesn't.
Addressing a problem and having it be addressed. Like from this point forward, we have created.
We've got this
thing.
problem solved.
It's solved from the, like being
Yeah.
able to look at the DPR. Well, like I think we may be one of the few companies on Earth that looks at the DPR KIT worker situation and goes, we've got that.
We've got this.
We've got that fairly handled. And moreover, like we can take our eyes off of it to some degree and know that, you know, the trend and the aberrations and the changes are going to surface themselves to us.
I think that's one really great use case amongst many alternate use cases that even include things like financial analysis, like fraud, follow the money, trust and safety, all these disciplines that are intelligence disciplines, but have been disparate and housed inside of different organizational units and haven't had access to unified tooling. And
I mean, you and I can nerd out about.
Yeah, we could like talk about that shit forever. Yeah,
we have.
And I want to talk about the APT1 report.
Sure.
We've come from this. You've been in the news this week. Kim Zetter wrote an incredible piece in an interview.
Wherever she is, I saw her floating by out there a little while ago.
Shout out to Kim Zetter. Is it the anniversary of the report this
What was that?
year? This year is how many years since the report?
So it was 2013.
I want to go back to the genesis of the report because as I was reading the Kim Zetter piece in the interview, I was fascinated by like some of the early thinking around what you're doing and some of the decisions that had to be made when you decided to go public. My question to you is, how did you decide which pieces of data was like credible enough to include, and including, you know, going into some of that details and what to leave out? Like what was
and so that's really important because the other thing that we wanted to make sure to do is tell the story in a reliable way that we could back up any claims that we made. And so we essentially took honestly, it's sort of like the precursor system to Synapse, where we did have all of that knowledge in a graph-based platform so that we could go back ourselves and dig in and sort of decompose some of those larger assessments and say, here's the ground truth that led us to this conclusion, right? And so in instances where things were just a little too potentially coincidental, right? It had to pass, like everything that we included in the report had to pass the like
a threshold.
And so like there's a concept in intelligence analysis called alternate competing hypothesis. And all the analysts in the room are super familiar with it, but it basically means come up with alternate explanations for an observation and explain why they're not the case, right? And so as long as we had like reasonable ACH being done against a lot of that data, we were relatively confident. And also like it's sort of a holistic kind of thing as well. Like there's a point at which the body of evidence just becomes so overwhelming. Yeah. And so, I mean, actually, the original executive summary to the APT1 report literally phrased it as an Occam's razor argument, because you're never going to have it on lock. It's never going to be proven, right? But it's going to be so likely, so probable as to be unavoidable. And so like we actually phrased the original executive summary as an Occam's razor argument of like either, you know, a well-resourced years-long campaign has been going on right out of the same facility as the PLA and blah, 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 or PLA unit 61398 is APT1, right? And so like the Occam's razor argument, this ridiculously convoluted scenario or this easy explanation is pretty self-evident. And actually Kevin Mandiant nixed that section of the executive summary being like, oh, you know, he basically said, no one's going to know what Occam's razor is, Visi. That's way too academic. And like, I'm very rarely accused of being too academic. And so essentially, like, this is a little bit of, you know, kind of backstory, but little dirty laundry. But I was like, Kevin, that's exactly what it is. It's an Occam's razor argument. He's like, no, we have to cut it. It sounds too academic, too fluffy. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever, we can cut it. And then the media picked up and started calling it an Occam's razor argument. Really? And I got a call from Kevin later, and he was like, fine, you were right. Like, we should have kept it. It should have been an Occam's razor argument.
You gotta frame it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, one, exposing these members down to their faces and identities meant that you were like revealing sources, operations, some of the things you were doing for monitoring.
Yep.
What were your biggest concerns at the time around like reprisals and blowback risk? And in retrospect, do you think those fears were justified?
Sure. So
what would you do differently?
Yeah. So I wasn't actually super afraid, mostly because at the time, and still I think mostly true, China doesn't really engage in sort of like directed personal reprisals the same way as like Russia might or a drug cartel might, right? And so like I think that realistically,
personal fear wasn't really there.
Yeah, the personal fear. I mean, obviously they might try to try to remotely hack and discredit or something like that. And so we definitely told the like actually I was just talking the other day with a couple of the folks that were in the Mandiant security engineering team at the time. And they were like, yeah, we got told that like some big shit is coming, like batten down the hatches, which we had said that we should do that. But it mostly didn't materialize. There were a couple of instances of a couple of the sort of like talking heads, because like we certainly weren't going to be talking to the media about it. So we briefed, a few of the Mandiant leadership. And there were a couple of them that were concerned, and they were sort of asking like, do you think there will be reprisals? Like, do we need bodyguards and stuff? And I'm like, no, like you'll be fine. But it turned out they were. And so like, again, like if I were doing something like this against like a drug cartel or the Russians, like it'd be a very different threat profile. Yeah.
How much
it's like, I don't want to get poloniumed.
How much of that issue is just being right at the start of this, right? Like basically not knowing what kind of reaction you're going to
I mean, that was entirely into 100% true. Like we had no idea. And so like, we were preparing for scenarios that never materialized, right. But in a lot of instances, there was also a lot of concern about even friendlies' responses, right? Like I was more concerned about what the U.S. government responses would be than I was about what the threat actor responses would be, which kind of says something about the community, right? But essentially, for the most part, that didn't materialize either. I got a couple of like angry, how dare you from a couple of analysts, but basically
the U.S. government took advantage of the report.
They what?
The U.S. government took advantage of the report.
Oh, absolutely.
The Obama-Xi meeting.
And that was the intent as well. Like that was a conscious part of our intent, because if we can't arm them to use this as leverage, right, then what the fuck are we doing, right? So,
and that became the meeting when he was told to knock it off, kind of. Like.
Exactly. Yep. And so, and again, it was like we talked about in the article. It was mostly an attempt to make them play by some of the same rules that we do, right? Like, I've got nothing against spy versus spy shit. That's always going to happen. It's been a tool of statecraft since the dawn of time, and I've even participated in a lot of that stuff. I've been your threat actor, right? But like, there's a level, there's a crescendo of it that's a nation state versus like poor little businesses trying to eke out a living and economic espionage, and the just the sheer volume of it, right? Like they were literally taking terabytes a week through these systems that we could observe, and we were only observing a fraction of it.
Right.
So,
Costin's got a question. Why didn't you name it Laughing Dragon? And why did you call it APT1? And where's your head at around APT naming conventions?
Sure.
Numbers versus names.
Yeah. I have some pretty strong opinions on threat cluster names. And actually, the APT1 report mostly was named that because the name pre-existed. And so at the time, Mandiant was clustering things into APT and Fin and a couple of others. But at the time, the UNC classification didn't exist. And we observed analysts on the government side, as well as in the private sector, that had this sort of cognitive bias going on, where if they were observing a threat cluster, if they were observing activity, and they couldn't connect it to an existing named cluster, it wouldn't get researched, and they wouldn't be able to continue researching it. And so they would like actually kind of they would literally try to retcon it into being a part of an existing cluster. And so that was a part of the reason that I came up with this, like, we need an UNC category that you can just draw a box around some activity, like let it go back to the graph in the sky.
But at least we've named it, and we'll
right.
have eyes on
it. And then again, if it comes back up again, or if new things show two of them are linked, maybe they could be joined. And eventually there might be a body of evidence that's sufficient to make some of those larger scale assessments about being nation state sponsored or being criminal actors or both, right? And so my current take on threat actor naming is that they should be arbitrary, opaque monikers that don't...
Justin says APT plus a number.
Or just threat actor plus a number, because even APT comes with connotation.
Right.
So the real problem is that also can create cognitive bias for when you might be wrong. Mm-hmm. Naming things pandas and bears and whatever...
We keep saying on the show, it's like it's a moving discipline, right?
Like ideally, threat clusters and malware families If somebody names another malware family fucking Dropper or Door, I'm going to kill someone. But essentially, all of those things should be essentially kind of like opaque monikers that are easily identifiable and human understandable, but don't carry any assessments in with them. Right. So that you can change your mind. You can, build up a body of evidence and say, like, we were 80% sure of this at the time, but now we're 90% sure that it's the other thing. Yeah. Analysts need to be able to change their mind, and that needs to be okay. And I think that having these names that carry these assessments along with them kind of defeats some of that.
It's just inexcusable. Like it's just
honestly, it's
inexcusable. Like it is an intelligence practice. Like
it's literally antithesis of good analysis.
On the fucking 10. Like it is just on the 10 a bad fucking move. I don't know. 100%. I don't know like how to look at that. And
I agree. And like there are definitely people with different takes on it, right? Because like an organization producing a report that is about a threat actor that's named in a way that implies that they're nation state and maybe implies that they're sponsored by China or something like that will definitely garner more clicks and garner a little bit more of the hype machine and things like that. So, I mean, I get it. There are business use cases.
But what about the weather reports?
What about what?
The weather reports?
Weather reports.
Yeah.
So you're a big fan of how Microsoft...
Oh, the storm groups I mean, it's sort of, most of that's just another proxy, although I think the storm names are the UNC equivalent, right? So like, I'm fine with that because it's just an arbitrary opaque identifier, right? Now, again, naming something food typhoon and blah, it's all the same as pandas and bears and...
Right. You're quoted as saying the APT1 report set off the threat intelligence arms race.
Sure, a little bit, yeah.
In your view, what are the biggest structural changes, cultural changes that have happened since the APT1 report in how private sector, academia, all these different parts of the world become CTI experts? I
mean, I think that in the private sector, like there was kind of the sudden realization that there's money in them their intelligences, right? In them their cybers. And so there was definitely, like it kicked off a whole cottage industry of organizations realizing that maybe they should be providing additional context. Maybe they should be hiring analysts to make assessments and then charging a little more for that, right? And so I think it's kind of even still being reflected today in a lot of the transitions that we're seeing in data providers, going from being like, we provide raw whois data, we provide NetFlow data, we provide internet scanning data, to we provide that data and we enrich it based off of our analysis and our assessments of things like threat clusters and malware families and C2 servers and infrastructure and VPNs, right, and egress points and things like that. And all of those types of assessments are analyst-driven intelligence assessments that in a lot of instances, those organizations weren't making before. And so it's facilitated, in my opinion, a lot of those providers going from being data providers to being intelligence providers, which is a good thing.
Right. You know my views on this. You like honestly, I've been
we're like nearly the same. We've the same mind.
We've discussed this plenty. But I mean, look, if I'm going to go anywhere with that, it's like we're talking about sort of that beginning and how this all builds up and the decision to invest and sort of the willingness to sort of see money in it. We're 12 years after that, and I think we saw an expansion and a ridiculous sort of heating up of this space. And now
the VC hype machine and all that stuff, right, comes into play when there's money involved.
When there's money, right, and sort of seeing the money, essentially, the line can only go up, right? Like eventually, it sort of goes to a point of, just imploding.
I think essentially, as long as that value is driven by actual impact, it'll be okay, right? And so, like those organizations charging incrementally more, predicated on giving additional value and actionability, and essentially doing analysis that all of their consumers would have had to do, right? Like think of the deduplication of work, right? That's happening when those organizations are doing their own analysis of their own data sources and then providing that to customers. Now all those customers don't have to do all that work, right? And so as long as that upcharge is sufficiently beneficial versus other organizations that are repackaging the same thing and charging triple for it, cough. No names, right? But there are organizations that are kind of just benefiting from that understanding that you should be paying more, but they're not actually providing more value, and I think that's problematic.
You've used very strong language to describe like this economic
What was that?
How this economic espionage has affected U.S. businesses.
Oh,
and
yeah,
this
like
this
very,
theft
yeah.
and so on. Do you think the subsequent policy changes from the APT1 report were sufficient? And has it
I mean,
been a deterrent? Has things gotten better
It's-
since then or worse?
it is incrementally, right? And so like that's all you can really hope for, right? You can't. There won't probably ever be one watershed moment that changes Chinese policy on hacking, but if there were, it would probably only cause incremental change. And so like there was obviously an initial stand down, right? APT1 was definitely put on like ops hold. And in a lot of instances, I think that most of those people that were originally participating in those ops got kind of parted out and like spread out to different orgs. Like they sort of decommissioned, deorganized that. But I think that they've definitely taken note of the fact that like the international community doesn't view that as acceptable behavior, right? And so, sure, like there's still some of it going on, but like, for example,
It's worse today, though.
well, maybe, but like, so Salt Typhoon as an example, since, everybody always like, there's a podcast, we have to talk about Salt Typhoon, right? That's a much more legitimate nation state spy versus spy target than the recipe for Coca-Cola or the efficacy studies of pharmaceuticals, right? And so I think that maybe some of that has had an effect on their just pure economic espionage.
Are you guys seeing a slowdown in economic espionage versus?
I really wouldn't know how to even begin to describe it, right? Like there's such a breadth of activity, and I think
it gets really hair splitty to determine like the difference. So like if they're hacking an aerospace organization, is that in pursuit of national defense,
right,
or is that in pursuit of furthering their own industry, or both?
Yeah,
right.
I think without a greater sort of all source awareness of where that information is going, like I think that's part of a big part of it is essentially like what's happening with that information when it gets somewhere.
100%. And like think about the apparatus that's necessary. So like we were watching multi-terabyte RAR files, and RAR has good compression, right? Like we were watching these multi-terabyte RAR files full of like, metal fatigue studies about crystalline grown engine like blades and pharmaceutical studies and the recipe for Coke, right? And so like imagine the apparatus that it takes to sort and determine which things are of most value and then actually disseminate that out to your industries. Like the apparatus of that is actually larger than APT1.
Yeah.
And look at during COVID what we saw, some of the activity around stealing COVID research and
right.
so on.
Yeah, exactly.
I got 2 more questions. Do you have anything for Visi?
I mean, I would start just I wanted to keep kind of going down that path because there's sort of this fascinating idea of what it takes to have proper data fusion. And
we actually proposed a research project even back in the Mandiant days. So if you read the Kim Zetter piece, we originally called the APT1 report Project Nightmare, and we had a subsequent project that I proposed called Project Daybreak, which I've never actually spoken about publicly. But essentially, it was since we have access to these C2 command and control systems, it was to embed data to modify things in flight that were being exfiltrated to include things that would ping home or exploits that would land on these systems that like
we call
this
it business logic software, by the way. Definitely not an implant, but yeah.
Sure. Of course, remote access tool. But the idea was to begin attempting to track how that data flows through that apparatus and makes it down to industry, right? Because we definitely have instances where we saw, the Chinese exfiltrate, economic secrets about organizations that had developed new products. We're just bringing those products to market, and then all of a sudden there's a Chinese product on the market that's exactly as good for like a third the price because they don't have to recoup any R&D. And like literally we saw organizations cancel product lines because of that, right? Like that's a huge effect. So
just to go back to the report again, if you
Sure.
were building the APT1 report today,
Sure.
the tools we have, legal constraints, geopolitics, and so on, what do you think you would do differently in terms of research, structure, disclosure,
Sure,
full
yeah.
engagements, and all of that stuff? Do you think it'll be a better report?
You can go be published at all.
That's
The lawyers.
that's where I was headed. So I think that in a lot of instances, the amalgamation of a lot of these like smaller companies into larger companies has created risk profiles that would probably prevent the APT1 report from being published now. So, for example, like there are certainly instances of organizations having detailed persona data about some of these threat actors and pulling punches and not publishing it and not being like, this is actually Chinese PLA because they have economic interest in China, right? And so I think that
Something you talk about all the time on the show is that threat intel is bogged down by economic interest of the vendor you work for.
100%. And so I think that we happen to be in a unique position of having access to a lot of this very bespoke, like super like tailored access style data without having a lot of the like economic ties and things like that would complicate things now. So, but for example, I do know about data sources now that I didn't know about back then, that if I had commercial access to those data sources and could burn them rather than my own data or things like that, I think that, for example, there's an absolute wealth of mobile telemetry data, social media and account data on the back end that if you had access to things like that, I think that you could produce much more detailed profiles about a lot more threat actors. And we're seeing organizations using Synapse doing that based off of having their own bespoke telemetry on the back end, like, you guys and some of our other customers. But
what does that say about the state of our awareness of things when
it's a little unfortunate, right? But again, with money comes risk and blah, blah, blah. And so the analogy that I always give, and I'll pick on Mandiant because it's my alma mater and it's the origin of the APT1 report.
allowed.
I'm allowed. All right, sweet. So in a lot of instances, the anecdote that I give people is the purchase price of Mandiant, of like Google buying Mandiant, was less than the stock movement caused to Google stock by the announcement. So like Mandiant's actual, the threat intelligence apparatus inside of Mandiant isn't really being viewed as a revenue source anymore. It's more like icing on the cake for other deals, and it shows expertise and it shows their investment, but it's not their revenue driver, and so they're not going to risk things for it.
And you think we're the worst for that?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that
Mandiant is held up as like the
no, absolutely, and it certainly was, and still continues to this day, right? But in a lot of instances, I think that the risk profile of a lot of the organizations doing high-end threat intelligence right now has grown so large that they can't make risky assessments, or even honestly not risky assessments, right? Like this is the PLA.
Right. One of my big beef with threat intel industry is everything we know is based on what a marketing department decides to tell us, because marketing funds a lot of the threat
100%. And actually, most threat intelligence,
which means we don't know shit.
Most public threat intelligence reporting is marketing.
That's
I hate to say that
most,
to the analysts,
all of
right?
it. I can say all of it.
Yeah, sure.
It means that we don't know shit. We know what marketers want to tell us to showcase their expertise.
So for example, like there are already serialization formats that one could use to attach a set of programmatically ingestible indicators to every report, and people don't do it, right? I'm not a Sticks fan, right? As I'm sure you're aware, but because it's too much of a subset of the analytically relevant model. But like FQDNs and IPs and DNSA records having tags on them is something you can serialize into a digestible format now, and nobody does it.
Right.
Every report could have an attached Sticks file or an attached Synapse nodes file, and people don't do it. Because it's marketing.
We're out of time. We have to wrap up. Visi, I could chat with you about this report for 2 hours, which means I'll reschedule another podcast where you and I can chit-chat with Juanito over here looking
without
at
me echoing Visi.
Yeah, I'll just
without
play,
my boy fanboying over here.
MCing behind them. Yeah.
I'll just play Jags.
That works.
Hey, again, thank you for your support to the conference.
Total pleasure.
Thank you for your work over the years, and thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, total pleasure. Anytime, man.
Absolutely.